Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. With Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Well, don't mention the snow.
March.
We've got March as well, and don't mention the snow either.
You're not going to mention the snow, and I'm not going to mention March. But, we've got plenty of the white stuff heading your way, I think.
I believe so. Probably, I've got my car booked in for some new all-season tyres. I'm probably going to be about 48 hours too late. And then they're probably a total waste of money because it'll probably never snow again for the rest of the year and I won't need them. But anyway, we are where we are with it. So, and it's my own fault because I didn't manage to get a car in time for this wintry spell that we might receive. But no.
Yeah, I think we're due some good weather after those times.
Probably are, aren't we? Yeah. Just my luck.
But elsewhere in the news at the moment, we've got the March plate change. It is now underway, the 24 plate, so the biggest of the two annual peaks. And I guess this year it will be even more of a sort of visible test of the appetite of retail buyers, won't it, than usual, because of the impact of cost of living, the delay on the ICE ban, and ZEV mandate as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very interesting. I mean, obviously, we're still awaiting the February figures. But obviously, you know, February is a fairly small month in comparison to something like March. But I think March and what that first quarter of the year looks like in terms of that EV, volume, the channels of that volume as well. And the manufacturers that you might clearly see are chasing that ZEV mandate early. But obviously, from a dealer perspective, Q1 is a very crucial period, and March, for the remainder of the year. So, yeah, it's going to be very interesting as to see what's happening in March. But yeah, it's I suppose in one way they got an extra day this year with it being a leap year to build up an order before the 1st of March. And
yeah, definitely. So wherever you're listening to the podcast, we hope it's nice and busy on your forecourt and in your showroom with the new 24 plate.
Definitely. And this week, if you've not caught it from earlier on in the week, we had the regular monthly catch-up with Darren Martin. We're sharing CAP HPI's February performance figures and where he starts to see the months progress going forward. But we're going to play a clip on today's podcast just to give you a flavour of what's in that interview as Darren shares some of the used car valuation trends in that little chat that Curtis and I had with him earlier on in the week. So look forward to that as we cover the headlines this week.
And we're also joined this week by Stephen Whitten, who will be spreading some much needed joy in his latest Menable moments. So that'll be after the midway break. And also look out for our weekday special interview available from Monday. And this will be with Chris Ashton Green, who is the CEO and founder of Regic Cars. And he's talking to Phil and I about best practices in after-sales retention.
You're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors.
Well, Phil, we have got a busy show because we've got those. We've got Darren, we've got Steve, and we've also got quite a few headlines to get through. So headlines this week are from Car Dealer, Motor Trader, Motor Trade News, Motor Finance, and Mail Online. Starting with JLR ditches plans to go agency. It was due to go live later this year. Complacent dealers need to push on, says Suzuki boss Dale Wyatt, who, funnily enough, also has a few things to say about agency. New consumer research identifies top car buyer pain points. 1 in 4 consumers consider purchasing hybrid as their next car. And big name tech giant pulls out of car market for the second time. I wonder who that is, Phil.
I sense a few U-turns this week, Curtis.
There's at least 2.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. If you're a supplier and would like us to profile your business and reach our audience of dealer bosses, managers and decision makers on one of our dedicated supplier specials episodes, get in touch with Curtis and Philip at motortraderadio@yahoo.com.
Now, before we look in detail at this week's headlines, here's an extract from our interview with CAP HPI's Darren Martin talking about February's used car valuations.
So the headline figures 0.7% up at 3 years. So that's a positive movement. It's the first positive movement we've had since March of last year, so 11 months ago. So definitely a relatively strong market. In comparison with previous Februarys, I mean it can be a month where I think it's the fourth strongest February we've had since Cat Live, but we've had a few times where values have dropped slightly, but it does tend to be a month where values don't move by much. It's not a volatile up or down month generally. We tend to get stability in January, and then in February you get a small increase. It feels very much like sort of going back to pre-COVID seasonality, to be honest. The first couple of months of the year have been pretty healthy. There's not been too much volatility. If you think about it, this time last year, we were in the midst of all the EVs dropping in value considerably. I think we dropped EVs by 7.5% this time last year. So on average, so then some went by far more than that. So it's been a relatively healthy and stable month.
And we always talk about live and the need for live rather than just wait until the monthly figure. I mean, how has it gone through the month? Has it just been a nice, steady progression? Have you kind of seen the month sort of strengthen on a regular?
It has to a degree. Initially, when we were in the first sort of few days of the month, we thought it was going to be stronger, actually. We were predicting it to be maybe a sort of a 1.5 to 2% increase because it did feel really strong. A lot of dealers that we've spoken to have sort of expressed how much they're having to pay for cars, and that it is a very strong market and they're having to pay over cap for vehicles. But within the data that we've seen, it didn't strengthen particularly from there. It kind of stabilized. So we're seeing sort of it hasn't moved up by much in the last sort of 2 to 3 weeks. It was that first week where we had a little bit of movement, and then over there it has been just increasing gently since then. So the live data remains so important, and there's lots of differences within the data with values going up, some going up and some going down, especially again in that EV world is a little bit mixed. But overall, it has been fairly steady through the month. Nothing dramatic happening.
And Darren, I mean, you often say the devil's in the details. So maybe turning to some of the trends that you may have seen across age bands. Did you notice anything particularly notable in February?
So age band wise, so there's a 0.2% movement up at 1 year 10. So again, positive, but not quite as positive as that 3 year point. It's probably no coincidence that the 3 year point is the strongest of the ages. That's where the shortage of vehicles will be. From that is sort of 2.5 million fewer registrations in the market that have happened because of COVID and semiconductor and other component shortages. So that 3 year is the strongest. We've actually seen a little bit of weakness at the 10 year point. Some of that has been led by high mileage vehicles being. We've certainly noticed that they've not been in so much demand. Maybe that older age has just peaked. That's been the strongest for quite a while out of all of the age bands. That sort of bog standard, cheaper necessity purchase. So that's been the weakest area. But overall, apart from that older end, some small movements up across the ages, 0.6% up at 5 years as well. We have seen that cars, the strongest sector is Super Mini. That's gone up by 2.4%. So a really strong performance for Super Mini. And then the second strongest mainstream sector was City Cars, which has gone up by 1.6%. So there's definitely some strength in those types of vehicles, which dealers are happy to stock because they're cheaper than SUVs. Consumers are keen to buy, and obviously a lot of the market is taken up by SUVs now. So there's less of those cars around, fewer vehicles within those sort of sectors. So they've performed quite well, and picked out some examples there that have done well. The Hyundai i10 and i20 both done well. have gone up. Clio, Ibiza, Corsa, Peugeot 108, the Citroen C1 and the Toyota Aygo all have stood out as going up by a few £100. So definitely strong for that area. SUVs have gone up by slightly more than the average, 1%, but the devil very much is in the detail for SUVs. But overall, a pretty strong performance for them, with small and medium ones actually performing slightly better than large SUVs on average.
Well, Curtis, if that doesn't sort of detail the devil's in the detail and the need to keep a close eye on data and what's happening in the market, then kind of nothing does it?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that's a good sort of taster of what Darren shared with us. There's obviously a lot more in the full interview, because he does talk about the different fuel types. And obviously, there's a lot of interest, a lot of attention on EV values. So he does go into some detail on that. But it's encouraging hearing Darren talking about this sort of return to pre-COVID seasonality, and we'd kind of got used to those month on month drops in values, but we're now starting to see values strengthen up and indeed increase. So interesting times as ever.
Yeah, definitely. So say if you haven't listened to it already, then please check your podcast feed and check out the complete interview there. And as Curtis said there, Darren does go into a lot more detail and shares his view of where he sees the market as we head into the month of March and the remainder of this first quarter of the year. So we'll head over to the headlines now, and as Curtis said there, we'll head over to Car Dealer and Auto Retail Network that both covered this story. And this is basically that Jaguar Land Rover cans fixed price car sales plan and sticks with traditional franchise model, saying that agency sales agreements due to come into force later this year have been put on ice. JLR will stick with the traditional franchise sales model, and it is the latest brand to roll back on plans to move to that controversial agency sales model. So I think there's probably a lot going on for these manufacturers at the minute, and you sort of wonder how much is relevant to this, whether it is that the more they've done in terms of research and the processes and the impact on the business, whilst they've got other things going on, is having an influence on when they actually do go to market on agency. And is this a deferment to relook at it in the future, or is it that they've done the research and they don't want to do it? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it is an interesting one, this, isn't it? Because it was pretty imminent. So last June, Jaguar Land Rover told its retail partners that it would be moving to agency, and that would happen by the end of this year. So those plans were already in place, and they would have been quite advanced as well. And behind the scenes, you can safely assume that a lot of the systems were being aligned for agency, the move from franchise. So this has come as a bit of a surprise, but as the piece does actually explain, they're not alone. You know, other brands have looked at agency and backed off. I think we were talking about Stellantis fairly recently. They looked as though they were quite well advanced on the agency route, but have now stopped and pulled back, and that they are not alone. And I think as we talk now, Mercedes-Benz, they're now over 12 months into agency, so they went live January last year, and there's a lot of learnings from Mercedes, which I guess the other OEMs are studying very, very closely, and this may well feed into their plans, their intentions.
Exactly. I mean, there's some good commentators in this piece. They've approached Darren Edwards, who's the CEO of Sytner Group. Robert Forrester is quoted in here from Virtue Motors, saying that the news that the franchise model will be retained is a decision that was made in consultation with the investor community and provides the stability to progress with delivering innovative services to our clients without distraction. On this basis, we welcome the news. So I think it's, again, whilst there's a lot going on in the market, we talk about it on a weekly basis, don't we? This is every Monday, everything else that's taking place, that it's probably a distraction that the network and the franchises don't need, especially with the dealers as well. So yeah, it's going to be it's interesting to say the least, that now we saw that 2024 was going to be the year where a lot more transition to agency. It's very quickly turned out that it's becoming a year where they are just coming up and deferring this transition to agency.
Yeah, and the thing that surprised me about this announcement is that agency was very much an integral part of the whole reimagined strategy that JLR announced last year, where they were moving to this house of brands concept. So you wouldn't see Land Rover on the outside of a dealership. It would be Range Rover, Discovery, Defender, whatever, and the separation of Jaguar and Land Rover. So there's it would be fascinating to know what actually prompted this, because as I say, the agency was an important part of that.
Yeah, and I suppose alongside this, the news come out this week where Tata have now identified and got the planning in place now. Is it Somerset, I think, Curtis, for the battery plant, which, it is, again, great investment into UK automotive, great investment from the parent of JLR in terms of Tata, and I think it's going to generate 4,000 jobs, I think, from memory. When they get that going. So yeah, there's a lot going on, I think, at the minute for these manufacturers, and a lot of money being spent as well on this kind of thing. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, that investment alone is worth £4 billion. So massive investment there. But welcome news, definitely. And within this story, before we move on the newsletter that we put out on Monday morning, we'll add a link to Auto Retail Agenda's coverage of the story, because they've got a great section on their website, which I refer to a lot, because it's and I'm sure you do as well, yes, Phil, because it's basically an A to Z of all the brands and where they stand on agency. So they've updated it with Jaguar Land Rover. So do take a look at that.
Definitely worth a look for that one.
So next headline is from Motor Trade News, and it is "Complacent dealers need to push on," says Suzuki boss. So this is based on some comments made by Dale Wyatt, director of Suzuki, in association with you guys at Cox Automotive for the latest Insight report. And Dale is great, because he always has a view on what's going on in the market, and this time he's really looking at sort of the approach to car sales at the moment in the current climate, with cost of living, with agency, and he sort of hones in on the impact this is having on dealers, because there's an interesting quote in this where he says, "Many people haven't the muscle memory for performing in a push market. We're in a period of what I call post-COVID coziness. The key thing to think about now is how to survive in a market that punishes inactivity and rewards consistent proactivity." So he's not pulling his punches.
He's not, no.
Is he, Phil?
No. And he doesn't. And this was based on, like I say, part of the Insight report. But again, we did a video, an interview with him that's available on YouTube. That having that conversation with Dale, and he say, he's constantly got that view, and the acronyms and the comparisons he comes out with are fantastic. But he wasn't pulling his punches, and I think you referred to it on the previous story that he also does reference agency model and how he looks at agency model, because obviously Suzuki currently have got no plans of transitioning to the agency model. He's quite happy with the OEM and dealer relationship that they have, and it's working very well for them at the minute. But in the interview, he does talk a little bit about agency model, which I know you like that quote, don't you?
I do, yeah, because he makes this analogy with Grand Designs, the TV program, and he says if you actually watch Grand Designs, the houses are invariably fantastic by the end of the episode, but they normally go over budget and take much longer than planned. That's how agency will go. Some will get it right, and a lot will get it wrong in the process. So, again, very succinct, and what a great take on the approach to agency.
Yeah, and clearly that pre and post COVID, pull market returning to a push market, agency model, it's all relative, and I know people do watch and listen to a lot of what Dale has to say and his view on the market. I mean, he's got decades of knowledge and experience in the sector, so it's always worth listening and reading what Dale's got to say. Heading over to motortrader.com now, and the title here is Price Haggling is Biggest Pain Point for Car Buyers. Now, this is from a study from the Digital Touchpoint survey of 3,000 market consumers by Motors, and it's such rich content in this study, in this survey, in the Curtis.
Yeah, because it found that price negotiations topped the list of these pain points, with 43% of those in market car buyers saying they found the process difficult. And it also highlights some of the other pain points. So making sense of pricing was also a concern for 25%, and understanding and arranging finance for 23%. And it doesn't stop there, because other factors cited included finding the right car for specific needs at 25%, reviewing the condition of cars 24%, and also just making a short list of cars to consider at 21%. And I think that's possibly something that often gets overlooked, the sheer choice of cars now, because on the new side and the used side, we've got so many new brands coming to market. We've got so many derivatives. So it's pretty daunting for someone from outside of the industry to make sense of the different models and what's best for their individual needs.
Yeah, all the tech on them and safety equipment, everything else that you say, it does add a lot of complexity to the buyers, and the way the market has been shifting, and again we refer to this transition to EV and everything else, that inevitably there is a consumer in the middle of all this that, as you say there, needs to make sense of it. And there's a nice little quote in the story from Lucy Tugby, who's the marketing director at Motors, saying that as the cost of living crisis continues to bite, purchasing a car can be an even more challenging experience for buyers, particularly those buying used. And that the research reveals just how uncomfortable the buying process can be for many buyers, especially when it comes to price negotiations and understanding what price to pay. There's a lot of great insight in this.
So we're back with more headlines after this week's Menable Moment.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand, wherever you are, and on your podcast feed. Next up is our latest Menable Moment, looking at mental wealth and well-being awareness and best practice in the automotive sector. With me, Stephen Whitton. Yeah, hi guys, it's Menable Moments time again. And before we start, a very big thank you for the opportunity to have a bit of an episode with you a couple of weeks ago, and then for you guys to mention it again last week. So, if you didn't get to hear it, that podcast is available on your podcast feed. And go back and have a bit of a listen, where we were telling you a little bit more about Wellbeing Winners and what we're up to. But anyway, this week, what I want to talk about is love. Sweet love. What the world needs now, because there's just not enough love. Oh, there was a song in there. Wasn't that a song? Well, if it was, anyway, it's now in your head. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. That was it. Who was it by? I've got no idea. Anyway, before you think I've lost the plot, it's actually not just about love, it's about joy. Now, apologies if you have an Auntie Joy or your mum was called Joy or anything like that, so it's not meant to be aimed at her, but it is the subject of joy and joyfulness and joyousness and any other connotation of joy as well. And the reason this has come to mind is because I've had my own personal epiphany, light bulb moment, whatever you want to call it, in the last week or so. And how that came about was a couple of things. Firstly, had a little bit of misadventure in the car, and as a result it ended up I ended up limping into a dealership where basically the car was kind of on its last legs and ended up having to go and be checked out and stuff. And I've got to say, when I walked into this dealership, the welcome was cold, unfriendly, unwelcoming. The service advisors were clearly stressed off the clock, and the first thing that they said to me was they were 2 techs down and 1 on holiday. So I just thought, you know what, I'm in the trade and I know and I get it and I understand how this works. But if I wasn't in the trade and I was at that point a very distressed customer, I'm not sure what kind of impressions I would be getting. But when I step back and look at that and come at it from our industry's perspective, what I took from it was there ain't a lot of joy in that business. The heating's on the lowest possible setting. Everything's untidy. No one really wants to talk to each other. It's cold. There weren't even any tokens for the coffee machine. So I was thinking, well, there ain't a lot of joy in this business, is there? And that started me thinking, because by comparison to, and I'm not claiming credit for this by any means, but by comparison to a few dealers that I am working with where there is joy in those businesses, it's a world apart, and the results are coming in as well. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that that's going to be the case every day and we all need to prance around like fairies throwing stardust everywhere. That's just a part of it. What we do is just make a commitment to do those little things that give us joy. Now, the second part of what happened was I had a conversation with a coach, and this person took me down a particular route that was very formulaic, very process-oriented, and very much about then making me become a bit of a slave to a spreadsheet, a bit of a person that would then be totally focused on the results and the numbers. And I get that, and I know how important that is, but it doesn't suit my personality style. It doesn't suit who I am, and more importantly, it doesn't give me joy. Now, in the time that I've then pushed all of that away and made this commitment to become more joyful, more present, more intentional, more determined, ironically, stuff has come to me. It's worked the other way round. So I'm now totally on a mission to spread joy and I don't know why I chuckle when I say that. Spread joy and get out there and just go, for God's sake, let's all have some fun and enjoy this. And if you still want to sell more cars and you want to apply the process, do it with joy, do it with love, do it with energy and commitment, because the world is a tough place right now. If you're watching the news, it's grim and horrible. The weather still ain't that brilliant. And we just need more joy. We need love. And as the song says, there ain't a lot of that going around at the moment. So let us, as our fabulous industry, do what we can to make as much joy go around our business as possible. So I haven't lost the plot. I'm still that cheeky little chappie from a council estate in Tottenham, and still out there, though, on a mission and helping you and your teams to just create that joy. Big shout out again to Motors for being an amazing sponsor of our Wellbeing Winners program. And at the heart of that is joy. You know, it's about making it a joyful place to work and a place where everyone wants to be there. And actually, when they do that, they feel okay and they feel safe to open up about any challenges or concerns or issues that they've got. And I really, really am becoming more and more convinced that joy is at the heart of all of that. And when we do that, we're creating fantastic experiences for our employees, for our customers, and ultimately for you as a business. So, you know how to get hold of me, stephenjwhitten.co.uk. No, it's not. Yes, it is. That's one website. And my email, which I thought I was going on to, was stephen.witten@menable.org. And of course, the Menable website is menable.org. Now, obviously, when you're spreading joy, it gets you a little bit excited, and sometimes your words come out a little bit fuddled. But hey, that's all good. That's what we're here for, is to have a bit of fun. Enjoy yourselves. Have a great time listening to the rest of the podcast, and I will catch up with you soon. Thanks again, guys.
Well, Phil, that was one take Witten.
I did wonder what direction it was going to go in at the start.
Yeah, I thought he did a brilliant job there. And I can actually testify that Steve is on a mission to spread joy, because I met up with him for a coffee a couple of weeks ago. And just in passing, he said that, do you know that from mid-March to late October, it's light at 6 o'clock? And I thought, yes, brilliant. Spring is nearly here.
Yeah, can we get past this week first?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also in response to what Steve was saying, what the world needs now, it was Dusty Springfield.
I was going to say, yeah, it came straight to mind, that one, but I thought he was trying to read some lyrics. It did as if he was
I thought he was going to burst into song.
Play it, but no, I think as always, thank you, Stephen, for that. And he did share obviously where you can get hold of him, and the best one is LinkedIn through his profile, or menable.org, and you'll easily get hold of Stephen. He's there to support and get involved with anything to do with mental health and mental wealth and well-being. So thank you again, Stephen. So on with the headlines now. So Motor Finance Online. And the next story is 1 in 4 drivers consider purchasing hybrid as their next car. And this is from a Close Brothers study. And only 12% of drivers currently expect to purchase an electric vehicle. Now, 1 in 4, 28%? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Could go either way. Yeah. But it's an interesting study. I mean, obviously at the minute, EVs, whether it's in the new car market, used car market, but particularly for consumers, is the key topic of conversation, because it is the pivotal to making it work. Is this transition to EV? But so the study reveals that approximately 1 in 4, or 28% of potential buyers, are considering a hybrid for their next vehicle. It kind of works into this stepping stone, this next stage before they go full EV as their option, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the delay in the ICE ban is a major factor here, because potential buyers who were thinking about EV in the next buying cycle, there's no longer that urgency. But I mean, this is very timely, isn't it? Because we're talking about this. It's March. It's the new plate change, and the push. I mean, we've talked about push from manufacturers. The push is very much on EVs. There's an incredible number of deals, low APR, 0% APR on new EVs, but is the appetite there? And this survey and many others have suggested that it isn't, because only 12% of respondents said they were thinking of buying EVs. And it goes back to what we've been talking about on previous pods about that lack of incentives to get customers into EVs, because they're still being put off by those high retail prices.
Yeah, and relating back to your Motors study, and there's a comment in here saying confusion persists amongst consumers regarding the best fuel type to choose, saying that 14% are unsure what to purchase. So, to your point, and your earliest conversation from the Motors findings is, it's very confusing. They told the 2030 deadline, then they told the 2035 deadline. They hear all the noise around this ZEV mandate and everything else, but they've got to try and make a decision as what do they buy, when do they buy it, do they go plug-in hybrid, do they go hybrid, do they go mild hybrid, do they go full EV? There is a lot, and do they go now, or do they wait for the prices to change? And do they go for legacy OEMs, or do they look at the new OEMs entering the sector? So from a consumer perspective, there is a lot of uncertainty and confusion starting to play in for them there.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't like to be a consumer at the moment. Would you, Phil? Oh,
No.
you are, aren't
Oh,
you?
yeah, I am, yeah, but yeah, I'm years off. It'll be 2036 before I make mine.
Oh,
But I
right.
don't progress this, to be fair, but I'm very terrible. Too much research. But talking about U-turns and talking about confusion, there's one less vehicle for them to make a decision on, and that is the Apple iCar that has been making a lot of noise over the years about Apple coming to market with an electric vehicle. And this is a story in Mail Online saying that at the end of the iCar, Apple scraps its autonomous electric vehicle plans after a decade of work. So one less car for the consumers to consider in their buying decision.
Yeah, definitely. And listeners will recall that it was only about 4 weeks ago, so about 4 pods ago, that we reported an announcement by Apple that it was once again planning to launch an EV. And this was after it had abandoned its self-driving Titan project. And at the time, it looked as though the new car would go on sale in 2028, so not that far off, and be pitched against Tesla, but with more limited self-driving capabilities. But the news came this week, and it was reported by Bloomberg that they've actually pulled the plug on it. And this years and years of investment, it's not going to result in a car at the end of it now.
Yeah, no, like you say, I mean, they've been planning this since, 2014? And, what they were going to do, not just, like you say, this was EV, but also the autonomous side of this development that they'd done. But yeah, I suppose they face the challenges like anybody else. I mean, have they gone early enough? Are they too late to the market? Because, watching what BYD, Tesla, Sepang, whoever coming into the market, and obviously, we talked last week about Carlos Stellantis, saying that by 2027 that he'll reduce the price of their EVs by 30 to 40%. How does a new manufacturer come into that sector? Is it? Again, is this just another U-turn and that's it, or is it back to the drawing board? Did they have any opportunity in that autonomous sector? Because that's sort of, again, something that many manufacturers have kind of taken down the priority list, I think, a little bit since the pandemic, haven't they? I mean, autonomy was the buzzword and the R&D that was taking place, but that's a little bit less so these days.
Yeah, because that autonomous vehicle that they were working on, and it's reports on it in the story that executives were concerned that its target price of $100,000 would make profit margins precariously slim. So it's a shame this, because it would have been good to see what Apple brought to the party. But I think it goes back to what we were saying, I think only last week on the pod, about the advantage that a lot of these Chinese brands have got is that they're all vertically integrated, so that they can produce cars relatively cheaply. They have state subsidy as well, and even companies the size of Apple, a behemoth like Apple, cannot bring a car to market sensibly priced and hope to sell it.
Yeah, so I always think, is this the last we'll hear from it? I don't know. We'll see. I think they're obviously putting a lot of investment in AI and that artificial intelligence sector at the minute, aren't they, and other things. So you wonder, is there going to be a place in the future in the automotive world? They've sort of threatened many times over the decades to enter the automotive sector. So I don't know. I think never say never with someone like Apple with what they'll do, but we'll see. So hopefully we've covered the majority of the headlines this week. And as I said right at the start, the full interview with Darren Martin there that goes into a lot more detail in terms of the activity throughout February and expectations of what that means going into March is available on your podcast feed. So if you're not listening to it already, then please do have a listen. And hopefully we have covered a lot of the stories, and the links will be in your LinkedIn feed on Monday morning, as usual, for you to take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the stories that Curtis and I have covered this week.
But that really is all for now. So many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. We're back on Monday with that special weekday interview with Regit's Chris Ashton Green. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. We'll be sharing all the URLs from this week's headlines on Monday morning. To make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.